Okay, we're with Shane Hips from Mars Hill Church. And Shane, thanks for meeting with me.
Glad to be here.
I just wanted to ask you, given all the changes in our culture and the church really kind of being moved to the sideline of culture instead of being at the center, what do you think the future of preaching holds?
I think what I think the future of preaching is obviously unknown, but I think it's an art form that is sort of fundamentally human, which means I don't think it's probably ever going away.
Okay.
Humans like to tell stories, they like to talk, and they like to hear stories. And so obviously preaching has already become less didactic and less cerebral, generally speaking, because the intellectual capacity of our culture has declined pretty dramatically since the rise of the electronic age. So from the 1800s until now, literacy rates have dropped, but also vocabulary has dropped dramatically. So I can't remember the exact statistics, but it was something like the average fourth grader had something like 40,000 words in 1920, and the average sophomore in college today has something like 8,000 words. So the range of vocabulary is so much smaller now that it's akin to oral cultures.
Really? That surprises me. That's a new statistic for me.
Yeah, I mean, I may not have the exact numbers right, and I can't remember the citation, but I remember reading that recently.
But literacy rates, because of technology, have actually dropped.
Yeah, and it's a weird way to describe it. Literacy is still, people can still read. In fact, much of our media are still text-based. It's that it's radically truncating our language capacity. It's making it much smaller. So it's actually similar to what oral cultures have. So oral cultures in general have a smaller vocabulary than literate cultures, because literacy allows elaboration. Once you fix a thought or an idea in space and time, you can then stand on it and elaborate. And in oral cultures, because you can't fix it in space and time, you're less likely to elaborate. So you tend to become much more conserving about your language.
Oh, wow.
So what that could mean is preaching could become a bit more of an echo chamber, and it would be harder and harder to have fresh words, fresh voices, because people will just tend to listen to everyone else and repeat back what everyone else is saying.
Okay, kind of a mockingbird kind of
bit.
technology.
A little bit.
Okay.
That's an idea. I don't know. I mean,
so
these are off the top of my head.
It's great. This is wonderful.
Until this moment.
That's wonderful. What about the effect of? You said this is largely the effect of media and the visual culture that we have. What about the use of visuals and visual culture in preaching? Is that part of the future, or even it's certainly part of the present?
Yeah, sure. It'll be part of the future and the present. My interest isn't so much what is or isn't going to be. My interest is in understanding what each medium does and doesn't do. Okay. And so this debate between words and images is a funny one, because you've heard the phrase, "Picture is worth 1,000 words."
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny about that is that that phrase fundamentally misunderstands that these are two modes of discourse, radically different modes of discourse, that one is not interchangeable with the other. So it's the same reason you and I couldn't have this conversation with smoke signals, right? It's what we talked about. So images are fantastic for cultivating a shared experience. Words are fantastic for unleashing imagination. If you understand that distinction, then you can know what to use each for. So, for example, if you ever read the book Lord of the Rings, did you read the book before you saw the movie?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And when you saw the movie, were there parts of it that displaced the things you had imagined?
Very rarely. They did too darn good.
They did a good job. It's true. But
my wife leaned over to me in the middle of the scene where the river takes the Black Riders away close to Rivendell, and she said, "This is how I pictured it when I was reading it."
Yeah, that's very
so
true.
they're actually quite good. But
they are pretty good.
But there were places where they either enhanced it or just didn't fit with my own imagination.
Sure. Or you didn't imagine Ian McKellen as Gandalf.
No.
Sure. Not that it was an offensive thing,
right.
But what happened then in that moment was, when you read something before you had an image, you were forced to generate creatively. Your imagination generated. When you're given a picture or an image, you're no longer asked to generate. You receive something. And because you and I both saw Ian McKellen, we have a shared experience now.
Gotcha.
What that means is it diminishes possibilities, diminishes imagination. It captivates, hijacks imagination, and spoon feeds us something else.
Exactly.
So that's the downside of an image, is that it limits imagination. The good side of an image is it creates shared experience. So my thing when preachers come to me and go, should I or shouldn't I use images? My question is, what are you trying to accomplish? If you want to unleash imagination, then don't use images, because they'll do the opposite. If you want to create a shared experience, then images are unbelievably powerful at that.
But what about movie clips, which are
That's
not
a
just
shared
images, and
experience.
that's a shared experience,
Yep.
even with the dialogue,
Yep.
even though the dialogue may be interpreted differently, which might open imagination.
But usually in images, movies are fundamentally visual media.
Yeah.
Yes, they use sound, but the sound is an amendment. And
Gotcha.
you know that because nobody goes to movies and closes their eyes and listens.
True.
So it's primarily a visual-based medium. So the question is then, which is better, shared experience or unleashing imagination?
But,
Just depends.
and your point is that they have a different intention.
Yeah,
Right.
and a different power, and they're both fine, and they're both dangerous, depending on what you're trying to do.
Exactly. How many people do you speak to in Mars Hill on a given Sunday?
Latest figure, I think somewhere around 35 to 4,000, something like that,
Okay.
on a given Sunday.
And 50,000 people tune in worldwide?
That's what I understand, yeah, something like that.
I lost it. What kind of advice would you give the mainline churches in terms of we have a long tradition of preaching and trying to be very, very good at it. And sometimes we've been successful, and lately we haven't been very successful. So what kind of advice could you give us?
I think one of the, I speak out of some ignorance, but I think I know enough, just enough to be dangerous, but maybe not helpful. So you tell me if it's helpful. I think the mainline tradition is largely from a pretty literate tradition. It's a very literate culture, and so they tend to esteem literate and literary sermons. Those are a relic of another age, and there are many who will resonate very well with that, but that group is shrinking. And so the mainline church would learn a lot from oral traditions.
From oral traditions.
The electronic age is increasingly a secondary oral culture. It's retrieving many of the aspects of an oral age, the tribal campfire and how stories were told and retold, and they were not literary. They were not elaborative. They were not as poetic. They were just different. They were more concrete, connected with the human life world, less abstract, less obtuse, and so that would be one of my pieces of advice. Simplicity.
Simplicity.
Finding your way back to the human life world in the simple, concrete ways.
And the oral tradition.
In the oral tradition, rooted in oral patterns of thought, which are very different than literate patterns of thought, and they're somewhat antagonistic.
Indeed. It reminds me of a book by, I believe it's Brian Swim, called The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos.
Okay.
And he has a wonderful line in there, and it says, we tend to make fun of our pre-literate cultures that sat around the campfire and told stories and repeated chants that told them who they were and what they were about.
Yeah.
And yet we sit around the glow of the TV and listen to the chants of advertising. Don't you think that tells us who we are and the stories we're supposed to listen to and who we're supposed to be?
Marshall McLuhan called the radio, which is the precursor to television, of course, the tribal drum.
The tribal drum.
It just happened on a mass scale now. So we still are tribal. We just do it on a much bigger scale.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's why.
Well, Tony Jones, it's not fair Tony's not here to defend himself, but he already got his chance on the interview. Tony says that preaching needs to be more dialogical, and that even though we may be less literate, we certainly have a lot more people who are getting education. So we should trust the interpretive community and shouldn't be giving monologues at all. We should be having a dialogue. What's your perspective on that view?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is an example of oral tradition.
Okay, so it's an oral
that's an oral
conversation.
Medium. It's a tribe. It's a tribe that communicates with one another back and forth. That isn't to say that there isn't always a tribal chieftain, an elder, someone who is somehow wiser, and that the tribe looks to that chieftain for something. So what I would say is, and I think Tony agrees with this, dialogue is important, but it's important to have really good content to start the dialogue. And that is the distinction between just everybody sitting in a circle going, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? The distinction is there is someone there who has the first word. And that first word is a very important word. And the content is significant, thought through, and usually, hopefully, profound. And from there, it can instigate an important conversation. It can set the agenda of that conversation. And so that's why I think it's a mistake to assume that dialogical preaching is just everybody having conversations.
Yeah.
So
he'll say that's not true either.
That's why I don't think Tony and I are odds.
A whole prep team.
Absolutely. And so the way I say it is, I think preaching increasingly becomes the first word rather than the final word.
So 3,500 to 4,000 people on a given Sunday, 50,000 people watching. How does the feedback come to you that makes this an interpretive community that then influences the way you preach?
Yeah, the way I preach. Well, there are a lot of feedback mechanisms that we have. So there's sort of networks of relationships that will ultimately hear from people. You know, when I first got there, to your point about interpretive communities and having to adjust. So when I preached in one context in Phoenix, a small Mennonite church, and then I went to Mars Hill, what I found is I was doing what I did over there and everybody liked it, and here it was really offensive and dangerous. People didn't know what to make of it. And they started assigning beliefs to me that I didn't have. And I realized that my language pattern had to change. So I had to literally, it was like moving from America to Japan and realizing that in Japan you don't shake hands, you bow. Well, I didn't know that. I thought this is a greeting. That's how you greet. And they go, no, what are you doing? Shoving your, we do this. That's offensive. What are you doing? And I didn't know that, and they didn't know that they were a culture either. So what they thought was this is universal truths that everybody knows. And when in fact it's a cultural set of norms that I had to learn, and it was their job to teach me. They didn't know they were teaching you, but they had to teach me.
And how did they do that?
Well, they told me things like, that was offensive, and I think you're a universalist, and I'm not sure I can go to this church anymore. And I thought, where'd you get that idea? And I said, well, you said this, this, and this, and you didn't say Jesus enough. Okay. So the word Jesus, you haven't heard enough. Even though I said it 3 times, how many times do you need to hear it? It wasn't about the number of times. That was about earning trust. So I had not earned the trust to do some of the things that I needed to be able to say. And the way that I needed to earn trust was to say, I speak your language, I know your customs, I affirm them. Now that you know that I affirm, speak, and understand your customs, now I'm going to make steps beyond them. But if I try to make steps beyond them before acknowledging, understanding, and admitting that I know them, I become a foreigner, a threat. And so we got that through the internet, we got that through staff, we got that through all kinds of feedback that I had to learn and make adjustments. So what I learned was I went back and I said, okay, they don't know what a Mennonite is, for example, so I need to go back and tell them a Mennonite's a Christian. You know, like, I believe in Jesus, I think he's the Son of God, I believe in the Bible, and here's some things that make me a Christian. Never mind that I'm ordained in 2 different churches and been to seminary and, you know, went to a Christian school. And never mind all that. You need to know now, I believe the things that make you feel safe. Now that we've got that handled, now we're going to talk about some things that you don't know much about, and that'll be interesting.
Okay.
And so that's the way I got feedback, was through those channels. Now, in some cases, I would request to meet with people because I wanted to understand what was going on. You know, the fear was so fascinating to me. I was like, what on earth could you be afraid of? This is not, okay, there's something I'm missing. And I would sit down with them, and they'd be really frightened. And I would listen and hear the fear, and that helped me know, next time I get on that stage, I need to know there are people in that emotional state. From the moment I start, they're in that emotional state. And I need to help them understand, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. And so here are the things I can say to help you understand, truthfully, I'm with you.